August 28th is a day worth remembering. We are standing at the edge of a powerful astronomical event, a deep, partial lunar eclipse. During this eclipse, Earth's shadow will move across the moon, covering almost all of its visible surface. From a scientific perspective, this is a natural astronomical phenomenon. But spiritually, lunar eclipses have long been associated with revelation, emotional intensity, endings, release, and transformation. This does not mean that something terrible is about to happen. It also does not mean that every unusual experience is a supernatural message. The real theme of this eclipse is discernment, knowing what deserves your attention, what needs to be released, and what must be observed without immediately being interpreted. The moon does not produce its own light. It reflects the light of the sun. During a lunar eclipse, that reflection is temporarily interrupted as Earth's shadow passes across the moon. Symbolically, this creates an interesting image. The light is still present, but our ability to see it clearly becomes limited. Something may be happening beneath the surface, yet the complete picture may not be immediately visible. That is why the spiritual message of August 28th is not about forcing answers. It is about slowing down, observing carefully, and allowing clarity to return naturally. For manifestation, this eclipse can be approached as a two-stage process. First, you remove what is interfering with the reality you want to create. Only after that do you decide what should replace it. Begin with the symbolism of the lunar eclipse. Lunar eclipses have traditionally represented endings, culmination, release, hidden information, emotional attachments, and situations reaching a point where they can no longer continue as before. Before asking for something new, identify the condition, belief, commitment, habit, or relationship that could prevent you from receiving it. If you want a new opportunity, but remain emotionally attached to a situation that keeps you stuck, that attachment matters. If you want financial growth, but continue repeating habits that drain your money, those habits matter. If you want a healthier relationship, but remain connected to a pattern you already know you never want to experience again, that pattern matters. Instead of immediately trying to add something new, begin by subtracting. You cannot keep asking life to give you a new room while refusing to empty the one that is already full. Sometimes the opportunity is ready, but there is no space for it because your life is still occupied by something that has already completed its purpose. Ask yourself, what am I carrying that no longer belongs in the future I say I want? Once you identify what needs to leave, move into the symbolism of the sun. Spiritually, the sun has long represented vitality, confidence, visibility, abundance, willpower, and creation. After creating space, become clear about what you want to place inside it. Do not simply say that you want more money. Decide what financial growth actually means to you. Is it a specific level of income? Growth in your business? Freedom from debt? A new professional opportunity? Or enough stability that money no longer controls every decision you make? The same principle applies to love. Do not focus only on attracting a particular person. First, define the pattern you refuse to repeat. Then decide what kind of relationship is genuinely allowed to replace it. What does respect look like to you? What kind of communication do you expect? How should you feel when you are with this person? What are the values that must be present? The manifestation message of August 28th is simple. The lunar eclipse symbolizes subtraction, while the sun symbolizes direction and creation. Remove what interferes. Then give the empty space a clear purpose. However, remain flexible about how the new reality must arrive. Be specific about the experience you want, but do not become obsessed with exactly how, when, or through whom it needs to appear. Sometimes your desired outcome arrives through a path you never considered. If you control every detail in advance, you may reject an opportunity simply because it does not look like the answer you expected. Solar and lunar eclipses are often discussed together. But their spiritual symbolism is traditionally different. A solar eclipse is generally connected with beginnings, identity, purpose, redirection, and the path ahead. It asks questions such as, where are you going? What are you becoming? What role are you ready to accept? What new chapter is trying to begin? A lunar eclipse is more closely associated with culmination, intuition, emotional attachments, revelations, karmic patterns, and endings. Instead of immediately presenting something new, a lunar eclipse often symbolizes something that has been developing quietly and has finally reached the point where it must be recognized. You may suddenly understand a relationship differently. An attachment that once seemed impossible to break may begin losing its power. A situation that has remained stagnant for months may finally reach a decisive moment. Information could also surface that changes the way you see something. You thought you already understood. This is the distinction to remember. A solar eclipse asks what is trying to begin, while a lunar eclipse asks what can no longer continue in the same way. Therefore, the spiritual focus of August 28th should not be on chasing the next thing as quickly as possible. It should be on recognizing what has reached its turning point. Sometimes, the clearest indication that something new is approaching is that the old situation can no longer maintain its original shape. One of the greatest mistakes people make during spiritually intense periods is assuming that intensity automatically means importance. A coincidence happens at the perfect moment. The same number keeps appearing. A tarot card feels more accurate than expected. Someone says exactly what you were thinking. Suddenly everything begins to look like a message. This is precisely when discernment becomes most important. A spiritually charged atmosphere can make ordinary events feel filled with meaning. That does not mean every experience is meaningless. It simply means you should become more selective about what you accept as significant. Not every strange moment deserves to become a prophecy. Not every emotional reaction is a warning. Not every coincidence is an instruction. A genuine sign does not need panic to become important. The correct question is not, am I noticing more things? The better question is, what continues to feel true after the emotional intensity settles? Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is refuse to turn every coincidence into a command. This is especially important for healers, spiritual readers, empaths, and energy workers. During this eclipse, the issue may not be that intuition becomes stronger. The real difficulty may be separating clean information from emotional interference. If your spiritual practice involves working closely with other people's emotions, expectations, fears, grief, hopes, or obsessions, you can easily absorb something and assume it belongs to you. A reader can mistake emotional intensity for accuracy. An empath can absorb collective anxiety and interpret it as a personal warning. Someone can feel something strongly without understanding where that feeling came from. More sensation does not always mean greater clarity. Pay attention to anything that feels unusually loud, repetitive, invasive, or difficult to separate from your normal emotional state. The question is not whether you are receiving more information. The question is whether you are receiving it clearly. As the eclipse approaches, you may also notice that being around other people feels more draining than usual. Conversations may seem heavier. Crowded places may exhaust you more quickly. Even people you normally enjoy could temporarily feel overwhelming. If that happens, you may need enough silence to identify what you genuinely feel and what you may have absorbed from the people or environments around you. Notice whether a strange mood disappears when you leave a particular place. Observe whether your thoughts become calmer once you are alone. Pay attention to the difference between your emotional condition before entering an environment and the way you feel after leaving. Wanting space does not automatically mean that something is wrong with your relationships. It may simply mean you need quiet to restore your emotional balance. You do not necessarily need to cut people off. You may only need stronger boundaries. Remember this, not everything that gets your attention deserves your obedience. Fear can enter your mind without becoming an instruction. Someone can criticize you without their opinion becoming your truth. A negative thought can appear without requiring you to follow it. We cannot always control what captures our attention, but we have far more control over what we give authority to. You can notice fear and still move forward. You can hear the noise and still choose your own direction. Attention can be automatic, but obedience is a choice. Another important danger during spiritually intense periods is projection. Projection can feel almost identical to intuition when you are emotionally invested in what you want to believe. A stranger suddenly feels like a soulmate. An opportunity begins looking like destiny. A rejection becomes spiritual warfare. A coincidence becomes prophecy. Someone looks at you in a certain way, and you immediately believe there is a powerful energetic connection. The problem is not that meaningful coincidences never happen. The problem is that people frequently add more meaning than the event can reasonably support. Projection does not necessarily reveal reality. It decorates reality with the story you want to be true. Eclipse periods can make this more common because people are already expecting something significant to happen. Expectation encourages the mind to connect unrelated events. You think about someone, and that person sends you a message. You immediately assume the connection is destined. You hear the same song twice and decide that the universe is communicating with you. An opportunity appears after a difficult week, and you call it your guaranteed breakthrough before investigating whether it is actually suitable for you. Someone rejects you, and instead of accepting the situation, you decide that the person must be afraid of your energy. This is where spiritual language can become dangerous. It can transform ordinary disappointment into a complicated explanation that protects the ego from reality. A spiritual explanation is not automatically a deeper or more accurate explanation. Sometimes rejection is simply rejection. Sometimes a coincidence is only a coincidence. Sometimes an opportunity is only an opportunity and must still be evaluated carefully. Sometimes a person is not your soulmate. One of the strongest signs of projection is when your interpretation makes you the center of everything. If every obstacle means that someone is threatened by you, every rejection means you are being spiritually attacked. Every coincidence proves you are chosen, and every stranger is connected to your destiny. Then your interpretation should be questioned. This does not mean spiritual experiences are false. It means genuine discernment requires you to consider explanations that do not always flatter you. There is also a positive way to understand this eclipse, especially if you feel that you have been doing everything correctly while waiting for something to change. Perhaps you have been working quietly without receiving recognition. Maybe you have been patient with people who never offered you the same patience. You may have continued building something even when nobody noticed your progress. A lunar eclipse symbolizes turning points. That can include an imbalance finally reaching the moment when it can no longer continue. This does not mean the universe suddenly owes you a reward. It means that valuable work sometimes takes longer to become visible than expected. Sometimes the reward arrives only after you have become the person capable of holding it. That reward may not arrive as one enormous miracle. It could appear as someone finally recognizing your value. An opportunity may emerge because of work you completed months ago. Something you have been building could suddenly attract attention. You might finally receive the same effort you have been giving. Or you may realize that you no longer need to remain in situations where you constantly give more than you receive. The reward could also appear in a completely unexpected form. Perhaps the person who overlooked you is no longer the person whose approval matters. Maybe the opportunity you thought you needed will be replaced by one that suits you better. The reward may not be repairing the old situation. It could be entering a new environment where you no longer have to fight every day to prove your value. If you have felt overlooked, do not assume that nothing has been happening. Some of the most important progress occurs before anyone else can see it. You can become stronger, clearer, more prepared, and more capable long before the outside world recognizes your transformation. What grows in silence can still arrive loudly. This eclipse is not only about endings or losing something. It can also represent the creation of space for an experience that matches the effort, patience, and energy you have already invested. Once the eclipse begins passing, you may suddenly feel prepared to move again. During the eclipse, the moon is gradually covered by Earth's shadow, but the shadow does not remain there. After the maximum point, the moon slowly returns to full illumination. Spiritually, this creates a powerful image. Something that felt blocked begins becoming visible again. You may notice the same movement inside yourself. Something you have delayed may suddenly feel easier to begin. An abandoned idea could return with completely different energy. You may finally make a decision you have been avoiding. You could send the message, begin the project, return to something you stopped doing, or take the first serious step toward a goal you have been postponing. Sometimes motivation does not disappear because you stopped caring. Sometimes you simply could not see clearly enough to know what your next step should be. You may have been overthinking, waiting too long, or demanding absolute certainty before allowing yourself to act. When clarity returns, action can return with it. But the return of light means nothing if you ignore what it has revealed. If something becomes obvious around this eclipse, do not bury it again when life returns to normal. If you remember why a particular goal once mattered to you, pay attention. If you finally understand what has been holding you back, use that understanding. What you called laziness may have been uncertainty. What you described as a lack of motivation may have been disappointment. What you believed was a complete loss of interest may have been a dream buried beneath too much doubt. You may not become a completely different person overnight. Something heavy may simply begin losing its grip on you. Perhaps you do not need a new purpose. You may only need to reconnect with the purpose you stopped believing in. One of the most useful ways to approach this period is to follow a simple principle. Experience first and interpret later. Call it the 72-hour eclipse rule. For approximately 3 days around the eclipse, observe anything unusual, write it down, and remember it. But do not immediately give it a spiritual explanation. If you repeatedly see the same number, record it. If someone unexpectedly contacts you, notice the timing. If a symbol keeps appearing, an opportunity opens, or a coincidence feels unusually specific, make a note of it. The purpose is not to ignore these experiences. The purpose is to avoid building a complete story before enough time has passed to determine whether the interpretation is valid. During the eclipse window, collect information instead of conclusions. Notice what repeats. Observe what arrives unexpectedly. Pay attention to what continues, drawing your attention without being forced. Then allow the eclipse and its emotional intensity to pass before deciding what any of it means. After the intensity settles, review what you recorded. Some things that appeared important will disappear completely. A number may stop appearing. A coincidence may never repeat. A conversation that seemed enormous may later appear ordinary. That is not a failure. It is useful information. Time has filtered out some of the noise. If something continues after the eclipse, however, it may deserve closer attention. The same theme might return. An opportunity may continue developing instead of disappearing. A person could come back in a way that produces a real change. A symbol may keep appearing even when you are no longer searching for it. In other words, the experience survives the intensity of the event itself. Intensity gets your attention. Repetition earns your attention. The loudest experience is not always the most meaningful. Something can feel enormous in one moment and mean very little a week later. Meanwhile, something quiet can continue returning until it becomes impossible to ignore. Waiting also prevents uncertainty from turning into projection. People want to know immediately whether someone is meant for them. Whether an opportunity is a sign, whether rejection was protection, or whether a coincidence carries a message, when the answer is unclear, the temptation is to invent one. Waiting interrupts this process. It gives reality time to support your interpretation or quietly dismantle it. Clarity that must be forced is usually not clarity yet. As August 28th unfolds, remain observant but grounded. Record what happens. Notice what repeats. Give your emotions enough time to settle before deciding what every experience means. Whatever this eclipse brings, do not pressure yourself to understand every sign, emotion, or coincidence immediately. Some things become clear only after the intensity passes. Trust what continues to feel true when the noise settles. Remember that clarity usually arrives when you stop forcing it. Whatever is genuinely meant to move forward in your life will not require you to lose yourself while trying to recognize it.